Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're unpacking one of Australia's most profound and just plain weird enduring mysteries, the case of the Somerton Man.
Yeah, this is how he was found. It was December 1st, 1948. He was just slumped against a seawall on Somerton Beach in Adelaide. He was perfectly dressed, not a mark on him. It looked like he'd just fallen asleep and, well, never woken up.
So the question is, how could a man die right there in plain sight, surrounded by all these clues, and still remain a total ghost for 3/4 of a century? Okay, let's get into it because this story is just incredible. It's a cold case that stumped detectives for generations, and then it gets cracked by, of all people, an electrical engineer who saw the whole thing differently.
So, to really get a handle on this, we're going to have to do a little time traveling. We'll start way back in 1948, right at that bizarre scene on the beach. Then we'll follow this trail of seriously cryptic clues that started popping up. And then we're going to jump all the way into the 21st century to see the amazing science that finally gave this man his name back.
All right, so our story kicks off on this quiet Australian beach, and the scene itself was, well, it was both perfectly normal and just deeply, deeply weird.
See, this wasn't just some guy they couldn't identify. No, this was a man that someone had worked to make unidentifiable. I mean, think about it. The labels were carefully cut out of his clothes, his pockets were empty, no wallet, no ID, nothing. It was like a puzzle that someone had built on purpose. He was a ghost by design.
But you know what? The puzzle was about to get way more complicated. The clues that turned up next, well, instead of clearing things up, they sent the whole investigation down this crazy rabbit hole of secret pockets, Persian poetry, and codes that nobody could break.
So months go by, and a pathologist is taking another look at the man's trousers, and that's when he finds it, a hidden little pocket, a fob pocket, that everyone else had missed. And inside, just this tiny rolled-up piece of paper.
And on that tiny piece of paper was a phrase, tamam shud. Now this is a Persian phrase from a pretty famous book of poems, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and it basically means it is finished or it is over, a poetic way of saying the end. But the end of what exactly? A suicide note? Some kind of secret message? Or was it something else altogether?
The police put out a public appeal, and sure enough, a guy comes forward with the exact book that scrap was torn from. He said he'd found it just tossed in his car right around the time the man died, and in the back of that book, investigators found these faint pencil markings, a cryptic message that would become the new, absolutely maddening center of the whole case.
Now, you've got to remember, this was the height of the Cold War. So this code that nobody could read, it just fueled all this wild speculation. I mean, top military code breakers tried to crack it, and they couldn't. So people started asking, was this guy a spy? A secret agent on a mission that went bad? For decades, the theories were just endless. But the real answers? Nowhere in sight. And just like that, for more than 60 years, the case went completely cold. The code was still a mystery. The man was still nameless. It really looked like this was one puzzle that was never, ever going to be solved. But then, an unlikely hero enters the picture, Professor Derek Abbott. And he wasn't a cop or a detective, he was an electrical engineer who just got completely obsessed with the case.
And Professor Abbott, he had a whole new arsenal of tools to work with. He wasn't just digging through old, dusty files. No, he was using things like genetic genealogy, DNA analysis, modern data science, things that were pure science fiction back in the 40s. It was a total quantum leap for forensics, a jump the original detectives couldn't even have dreamed of.
So here's the thing. The key to figuring out who he was didn't come from digging up the body. That was a whole legal nightmare. No, the breakthrough came from a really unexpected and kind of fragile place, a plaster death mask that the police had made of the man's face all the way back in 1949.
Okay, so the team finds a few of the man's hairs stuck in that old plaster. They tried the usual thing, testing the roots for DNA, but it didn't work. They got nothing. So with pretty much every other option gone, they took a final desperate shot in the dark. They sent a single hair shaft without the root for analysis. And you have to understand, at the time, forensic science thought the hair shaft was basically useless for this kind of thing. But the results, they were absolutely mind-blowing.
2 million. That's how many genetic markers they pulled from that one 74-year-old strand of hair. Now, just to give you some perspective, a standard police DNA match, that uses maybe 20 markers. So this wasn't just a drop of data. It was a whole ocean.
And this is where having an engineer's brain really cracked a biological puzzle.
See, a hair shaft has DNA, but it's all broken up into tiny fragments. Turns out, that's actually perfect for a technique called SNP analysis. SNPs are these little tiny variations in our DNA that make us unique. The best way to think about it is like a digital video, right? Even if a few pixels are missing, you can still tell exactly what you're looking at. You don't need the whole perfect thing. You just need enough of these little unique markers to build a really clear picture. It was a brilliant move, applying an engineering idea called graceful degradation to a forensics problem.
So now they have this absolute treasure trove of genetic data. They upload it to a public genealogy database, and the team was finally ready to put a name to that plaster face. The digital hunt for his family and for him was officially on.
And this wasn't like a simple click and match on a database. Oh no, they started with a distant cousin. And from there, Professor Abbott and genealogist Colleen Fitzpatrick just painstakingly built out this enormous family tree. We're talking over 4,000 people. They were connecting dots across generations, all just to find one single missing branch.
And on that giant family tree, one name just jumped out. It was a man born in the right time frame. He fit the general profile, but there was no record of his death. He had just vanished from all official records right around 1947. Could this actually be him?
And that was it. That was him. After 75 long years, the ghost on Somerton Beach finally had a name, Carl Charles Webb. The great mystery, at long last, had its answer.
And suddenly, all these details started to paint a real human picture. He wasn't some international spy. He was an electrical engineer and instrument maker, ironically, just like the professor who would one day find him. He had a troubled marriage, and his wife, Dorothy, described him as solitary, moody, and, get this, fond of poetry about death. A detail that makes that whole "to mom should" clue feel so much more personal and so much more chilling.
So in the end, the science gave us the who. We finally have his name, Carl Charles Webb. But the why? Why did a Melbourne engineer end up on a beach in Adelaide? Why go to such incredible lengths to erase his own identity? And what did that mysterious code really mean? Well, that seems to be his final secret. Tamam should. It is finished.